Shattered reflections, the silk dress hung perfectly on the closet door, its deep emerald color catching the late afternoon light streaming through Nira's bedroom window. She stared at it with a mixture of dread and determination, her fingers unconsciously twisting the delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, the same bracelet Kieran had given her during their first anniversary. Back when his gifts came with genuine smiles instead of hidden barbs. "You're overthinking this," she whispered to her reflection in the vanity mirror, though her dark eyes betrayed the anxiety she was trying to suppress. Tonight was Dia's engagement party, and despite everything that had happened between her and Kieran, she couldn't bring herself to miss his sister's celebration. Dia had always treated her like family, even during the messy aftermath of the breakup. Even 6 months later, the word felt inadequate to describe what Kieran had put her through. It hadn't been a clean break or even a dramatic fight. Instead, it had been a slow, methodical dismantling of her self-worth, punctuated by his casual cruelties disguised as jokes and his wandering attention disguised as needing space to grow. Nira's phone buzzed on the dresser, pulling her from the familiar spiral of bitter memories. Rohan's name appeared on the screen, along with a message that made her smile despite her mood. "Ready to face the lion's den? I've got your back, and I promise to create strategic distractions if needed." She had known Rohan since college, back when he and Kieran were inseparable friends who shared everything from textbooks to weekend adventures. What she hadn't realized then was how different they truly were beneath the surface. Where Kieran was charismatic and commanding, drawing people into his orbit with magnetic charm, Rohan was steady and observant, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order and checked in during difficult weeks, without making a big show of it when Kieran had finally delivered his farewell speech. A masterpiece of manipulation that somehow made their breakup seem like her fault for being too clingy. And not understanding his needs, Rohan had been the one to show up at her apartment with takeout and tissues. He hadn't said much that night, just sat with her on the couch while she cried and raged alternately, occasionally offering quiet observations that helped her see through Kieran's carefully constructed narrative. "He's wrong about you," Rohan had said simply, when she'd finally exhausted herself with tears. "He's wrong about what you deserve, and he's wrong about what love looks like." As Nira began to rebuild her confidence and rediscover her own voice, she started to see her relationship with Kieran more clearly. The way he had dismissed her opinions during group conversations, the casual flirtations with other women that he'd brushed off as just being friendly, the subtle ways he had isolated her from friends and hobbies he deemed not worth his time. Now, preparing to see him again for the first time since their breakup, Nira felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was still hurt, certainly, and a flutter of anxiety about potential confrontation. But underneath it all was something new and surprising. A sense of her own strength that Kieran's manipulation had never quite managed to extinguish completely. She slipped into the emerald dress, noting how it complemented her skin tone in a way that made her feel elegant rather than exposed. This time, she was choosing her outfit for herself, not to meet someone else's expectations or avoid someone else's criticism. The difference was subtle but significant. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Rohan just pulled up outside. "Take your time, we'll get there when we get there." Nira smiled, recognizing the gentle reassurance in his words. With Kieran, punctuality had been a weapon he wielded against her, arriving precisely on time and then commenting acidly about her inability to plan ahead if she needed an extra few minutes. Rohan's patience felt like a small revolution. She grabbed her purse and took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the same person who had cowered under Kieran's criticisms or made herself smaller to accommodate his ego. This woman had survived betrayal and gaslighting and had somehow emerged with her kindness intact, but her boundaries firmly in place. Tonight would be a test. She knew Kieran would likely try to assert some kind of dominance to remind her of her place in his personal hierarchy. He might make cutting remarks disguised as concern, or worse, try to charm her back into his orbit now that she was looking happy and confident again. But as Nira walked toward the door, she felt ready for whatever the evening might bring. Had Rohan's steady friendship as an anchor, Dia's celebration as a focus, and most importantly, a newfound understanding of her own worth that no amount of manipulation could shake. The game had changed. Even if Kieran didn't realize it yet. The gathering storm the Malhotra family estate was transformed into something from a fairy tale. With strings of warm lights cascading from ancient banyan trees and marigold garlands adorning every pillar and archway. The scent of jasmine and rose petals mingled with the aroma of elaborate dishes being prepared in the outdoor kitchen, while a sitar player provided elegant background music that seemed to make the very air shimmer with anticipation. Nira felt Rohan's reassuring presence beside her as they approached the main courtyard, where at least 100 guests mingled in their finest traditional wear. She had chosen her emerald dress deliberately, was sophisticated without being flashy, beautiful without screaming for attention. Tonight, she wanted to blend in, celebrate Dia, and avoid any unnecessary drama. "There's the guest of honor," Rohan murmured, nodding toward the decorated pavilion where Dia stood radiant in a coral pink lehenga, her hands decorated with intricate henna patterns. Beside her, Vikram looked equally happy, his smile genuine as he accepted congratulations from a steady stream of relatives and friends. But it was the figure standing just behind the happy couple that made Nira's breath catch slightly in her throat. Kieran looked exactly as she remembered, tall and commanding, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream silk kurta that emphasized his broad shoulders. He was holding court with a group of cousins, gesturing animatedly as he told what was undoubtedly a captivating story, his audience hanging on every word. "You okay?" Rohan asked quietly, noticing her momentary hesitation. "Perfect," Nira replied, and she meant it. Seeing Kieran again was like looking at a photograph from someone else's life, emotionally distant despite physical proximity. They approached the blessing area where Dia was greeting guests. When Dia spotted Nira, her face lit up with genuine joy. "Nira, I was so hoping you'd come." Dia embraced her warmly, and Nira felt a rush of affection for this woman who had always treated her with kindness, regardless of her complicated history with Kieran. "You look absolutely stunning." And Rohan, "Thank you for bringing her. I know how much this means to me." Vikram stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Any friend of Dia's is family to us. Please enjoy everything, the food, the music, the chaos." He laughed, gesturing at the organized mayhem surrounding them as they chatted about the engagement ceremony and upcoming wedding plans. Nira became aware of eyes watching her from across the pavilion. She didn't need to look to know. It was Kieran. But when she finally glanced over, she found him studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something calculating in his gaze, mixed with what might have been surprise at seeing her looking so confident and happy. "Nira," his voice reached her before he did, smooth and familiar. What a pleasant surprise. She turned to face him directly, noting how he positioned himself slightly closer than necessary. Classic power move? She now recognized clearly. "Hello, Kieran. Congratulations on Dia's engagement." "She looks radiant." "She does," he agreed. But his eyes never left Nira's face. "I have to say you look ... different. Healthier." The comment carried just enough ambiguity to be insulting if she chose to take it that way. "Thank you," she replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Rohan moved slightly closer, a subtle but clear signal of support. Kieran's eyes flicked to him. With barely concealed irritation, Rohan still playing the noble knight. "I see," Kieran said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Some things never change. Important things shouldn't," Rohan replied calmly, the tension stretched between them for a moment before Dia's voice cut through the awkwardness. "Kieran, could you help me with something in the kitchen? Caterers have questions about the dessert timing." Kieran excused himself with exaggerated politeness. Nira felt a mixture of relief and unease. The encounter had been civil on the surface, but she recognized the familiar undercurrents. Kieran testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, establishing dominance through seemingly innocent comments. "That went better than expected," Rohan observed once Kieran was out of earshot. Nira nodded. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this had been merely the opening move in a longer game. She knew Kieran well enough to understand that her apparent happiness and confidence would be seen as a challenge to his ego. He wouldn't be able to resist trying to reassert control, to remind her of her place in his personal hierarchy. The evening was still young. She could feel the storm gathering. On the horizon, the humiliation, the formal ring ceremony began just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the courtyard in a golden glow that made everything look like a scene from a Bollywood film. Anira found herself standing near the back of the gathered crowd, Rohan beside her, as the priest began the traditional blessings. The air was thick with incense and anticipation. Family members holding their phones high to capture every precious moment. Daya and Vikram sat cross-legged on ornate cushions. Beneath a canopy of flowers, their hands joined as the priest chanted ancient Sanskrit verses. The scene was beautiful, sacred even. And Nira felt genuinely happy for the couple, whose love seemed to radiate from the ceremonial fire between them. She was so absorbed in the ceremony, she didn't notice Kiran moving through the crowd until he was standing directly behind her. His voice, when it came, was pitched just loud enough for nearby guests to hear over the priest chanting. "You know, Nira, I have to admire your courage in coming tonight," he said conversationally, as if he were making pleasant small talk. Not everyone would be comfortable showing up to their ex's family celebration, especially after ... He paused meaningfully, letting the sentence hang in the air. Several aunties turned to look at them with obvious curiosity. Nira felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her eyes fixed on the ceremony, refusing to engage. "After what?" asked Mrs. Sharma, one of the family friends, her voice carrying the eager tone of someone who sensed gossip. Kiran's smile was all innocence and concern. "Oh, I just meant after our difficult breakup." Nira took it quite hard, you understand. There were some ... emotional scenes. I was worried she might not be ready for something like this yet. Nira's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the weight of curious stares, hear the soft murmurs beginning to ripple through the nearby guests. This was exactly what Kiran did best, twisting the narrative to make himself look like the concerned, reasonable one while painting her as unstable and desperate. "But look at her now," Kiran continued, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "She's even found someone new to bring as a date. Though I do hope for Rohan's sake that she's learned to manage her ... intensity ... better this time." The word intensity was delivered with just the right inflection to suggest something unhinged, something embarrassing. Rohan stepped forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger, but before he could speak, Kiran made his next move. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed loudly as he somehow managed to bump into Nira while holding a plate of samosas. The oil-soaked pastries tumbled down the front of her emerald dress, leaving dark stains across the silk fabric. "Wow, how clumsy of me." "Here, let me help." He reached toward her with a napkin. But his movements were theatrical, drawing even more attention to the disaster. Several guests gasped, and Nira heard someone's grandmother tisking about the ruined outfit. The beautiful dress she had chosen so carefully was now a mess of grease stains and crumbs. "Don't touch her," Rohan said sharply, but Kiran was all ready. Stepping back with an expression of exaggerated concern, "I feel terrible," Kiran announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying easily over the priest's continued chanting. "You know how Nira is about her appearance? This must be devastating for her. She always was quite particular about looking perfect." Paused, then added with what sounded like gentle concern but felt like a knife twist. "Maybe it's better. This way, though, takes some of the pressure off, don't you think?" The implication was clear to everyone listening that Nira was vain, high maintenance, and now publicly humiliated. Several people were openly staring now, and she could see phones being discreetly angled in her direction. This moment would be captured, shared, gossiped about for months to come. Nira stood frozen in the aftermath, oil seeping through the silk. To her skin, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her ruined dress and burning cheeks. The sacred ceremony continued just feet away, but she felt as though she were standing in a spotlight of shame, exactly where Kiran had intended to put her. "That's enough," Rohan said, his voice low and dangerous as he stepped protectively in front of Nira. But Kiran wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Nira and Rohan could hear. "You should have stayed home, Nira. This is my family, my world. You don't belong here anymore, and everyone can see it." The words hit their target with surgical precision. For a moment, Nira felt herself shrinking back into the person she had been during their relationship's mall, apologetic, eager to disappear rather than cause more trouble. The familiar shame washed over her, along with the terrible fear that maybe he was right. Maybe she really didn't belong here. But then, she caught sight of Dia's face across the ceremony space. The bride-to-be was looking over with obvious concern. In confusion, her joy momentarily clouded by worry for her guest.
Right in that moment.
Nira realized that Kieran's cruelty wasn't just directed at Hurt, was poisoning his own sister's special moment. Something crystallized inside her chest. And bright as a diamond, she was done being Kieran's victim. "Excuse me," she said quietly to the people around her, and began walking toward the house with as much dignity as she could muster, her oil-stained dress rustling with each step. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting in earnest, but for the first time. She didn't care what they were saying. Rohan caught up with her at the garden entrance, his face dark with fury. "Nira, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "This isn't your fault, and it's not mine either." For the first time in months, she was absolutely certain of that truth. The revelation the guest bathroom in the Malhotra house was a sanctuary of marble and soft lighting, far from the whispers and stares of the courtyard. Nira stood before the ornate mirror, dabbing at the oil stains with a damp towel, though she knew the dress was beyond saving. The silk was ruined, but strangely she felt lighter than she had in months. "At least now I know exactly who he is," she murmured to her reflection, surprised by the calm determination in her own voice. Rohan had wanted to stay with her, but she'd insisted he return to the ceremony. Dia deserved to have her celebration. Continue without drama, and Nira needed a few minutes alone to process what had just happened and decide what to do next. She was about to leave when she noticed a phone, buzzing insistently on the marble countertop beside the guest towels. Someone had obviously forgotten it in their hurry to return to the ceremony. The screen lit up with each buzz, revealing message after message from the same contact. "K, brother." Nira hesitated. She should simply leave the phone where it was, maybe mention it to Dia or one of the family members. But something about the urgency of the messages made her glance at the preview text visible on the lock screen. Her blood went cold. "Dia doesn't suspect anything about what I told her regarding Vikram's ex, does she? We need to make sure she doesn't find out I made most of it up, ... The phone belonged to Ki, and with trembling fingers, Nira picked up the device. The messages were from someone named Arjun College, and they painted a picture that made her stomach turn. She didn't need to unlock the phone to read the preview messages that kept appearing. The stuff about Vikram still seeing his ex, brilliant lie, bro. Dia was so upset when you told her. Did you really convince her that Vikram was at his ex's place last week? That's cold even for you. She almost called off the engagement because of what you said. Lucky Vikram could prove he was at his mom's surgery. Why are you trying to sabotage your own sister's relationship? Nira sank onto the velvet bench beside the vanity, her hands shaking as more messages appeared. The conversation revealed a pattern of manipulation that went far beyond what Kieran had done to her. He had been systematically feeding Dia lies about Vikram's faithfulness, planting seeds of doubt and insecurity in his own sister's mind during what should have been the happiest time of her life. The messages painted a clear timeline. Just 2 weeks ago, Kieran had told Dia that he'd heard from a reliable source that Vikram had been seen with his ex-girlfriend at a coffee shop. When Dia confronted Vikram, it had led to a massive fight that nearly ended their engagement. Only Vikram's ability to prove he'd been at the hospital with his mother during her routine surgery had saved their relationship. But Kieran hadn't stopped there. The messages revealed lie after lie, claims about Vikram's wandering eye, manufactured stories about his commitment issues, even suggestions that Vikram was only marrying Dia for her family's money. God, why? Bathroom. The answer came in the next message from Arjun. I still don't get why you're doing this to Dia. She's always been good to you. Kieran's response, sent just minutes ago while the ceremony was taking place outside, was chilling in its honesty. She's getting everything handed to her. Perfect guy, perfect wedding, everyone's approval. Some of us have to work harder for attention. Besides, if she's stupid enough to believe me without proof, maybe she doesn't deserve happiness. Nira stared at the screen, feeling sick. This wasn't just about control or jealousy. This was about Kieran's fundamental inability to tolerate other people's happiness, even his own sister's. He was willing to destroy Dia's relationship, her trust, her joy, simply because he couldn't bear to see her flourishing while his own life felt less perfect. She thought about Dia's radiant face during the ceremony, the way Vikram looked at her with such genuine adoration, the months of planning and dreaming that had led to this night. All of it had been shadowed by Kieran's poison, his deliberate campaign to undermine the foundation of their love. More messages appeared. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Think you can plant any more doubts before then? Maybe something about Vikram's finances or his family. Dia's been so stressed lately, crying all the time. It's almost too easy. Nira's hands clenched around the phone. She thought about her own experience with Kieran's manipulation, the way he had slowly eroded her confidence and made her question her own perceptions. Now she was seeing him do the same thing to his own sister, the person who had always defended him, loved him unconditionally, treated him like a hero. The bathroom door handle turned, and Nira quickly set the phone back on the counter, her heart racing. But it was only Rohan, looking concerned. "I'm sorry to bother you, but Dia sent me to check on you. She's worried, and honestly, so am I." His eyes took in her pale face and shaking hands. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Nira looked at Kieran's phone, then at Rohan's kind, honest face. She thought about Dia outside, trying to enjoy her engagement celebration while carrying the weight of manufactured doubts about the man she loved. She thought about Vikram, who had no idea he was being systematically slandered by someone he considered family. "I've seen something worse than a ghost," she said quietly. "I've seen exactly who Kieran really is." She told Rohan everything, showing him the messages that were still appearing on the phone's lock screen. As she spoke, she watched his expression change from confusion to disgust to a cold, determined anger that matched her own. "We have to tell them," Rohan said finally. "I know," Nira replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But not here, not like this. Dia deserves better than having her engagement party ruined by her brother's cruelty." "So what do you want to do?" Nira looked at herself in the mirror, oil-stained dress, slightly smudged makeup, but eyes that were clearer and more determined than they'd been in years. She thought about all the times she'd stayed silent to avoid confrontation, all the moments she'd let Kieran's version of events stand unchallenged. "Not anymore. I want to give them the truth," she said. "All of it, but I want to do it right." Truth and liberation. The ceremony had concluded, and guests were gathering around the desert table where an elaborate 3-tiered cake awaited cutting. Dia and Vikram stood hand in hand, surrounded by family members with cameras raised. There, faces glowing with happiness that Nira now knew had been deliberately threatened by someone who should have been their greatest supporter. Nira watched from the edge of the courtyard. Kieran's phone secure in her purse alongside screenshots Rohan had helped her take. Her oil-stained dress had been covered by a dupatta that Dia's cousin had kindly lent her, transforming her appearance from disheveled to elegant once again. More importantly, her internal transformation was complete. "You sure about this?" Rohan asked quietly beside her. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, her voice steady with conviction. The traditional toast session was beginning, with uncles and aunties taking turns at the portable microphone to share blessings and embarrassing childhood stories. Kieran had positioned himself near the front, no doubt preparing to deliver a touching speech about his beloved sister that would contrast sharply with his private cruelty. When the current speaker finished his rambling story about Dia's childhood obsession with Bollywood dance, Nira stepped forward. The gesture was so unexpected that conversations quieted naturally. The microphone was handed to her without question. She looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some still whispering about the earlier incident with her dress, others simply expecting another generic blessing for the couple. But her eyes found Dia's face, bright with anticipation, and Vikram's kind smile. And she felt the rightness of what she was about to do settle into her bones. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound. System. For those who don't know me, I'm Nira. I've had the privilege of knowing this family for several years. She paused, finding Kieran in the crowd. He was watching her with a slight frown, probably wondering why she hadn't simply slipped away after her earlier humiliation. Dia, you look absolutely radiant tonight. And Vikram, you're clearly a man who recognizes a treasure when he sees one. A few people chuckled approvingly. But before we celebrate this beautiful union, I think there's something important you both should know. The mood in the courtyard shifted subtly. Nira could see confusion replacing casual interest on many faces. And Kieran's frown had deepened into something more alert and concerned. True love requires trust, Nira continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. And trust requires honesty. Fortunately, someone close to you has been working very hard to undermine both. She pulled out Kieran's phone, and his face went white with recognition and dawning horror. Dia, do you remember 2 weeks ago when you almost called off your engagement because you'd heard that Vikram was seen with his ex-girlfriend? Nira's voice carried to every corner of the courtyard now. She could see Dia's face changing from confusion to growing dread. Those rumors didn't come from strangers or well-meaning friends. They came from your own brother, who has been systematically lying to you about Vikram's faithfulness in an attempt to sabotage your relationship. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kieran started to step forward, his mouth opening to protest, but Nira held up the phone. I have the text messages, she said simply. Messages where he brags about making up stories, celebrates when you cry, and discusses his plans to plant more doubts before your wedding. That's insane! Kieran's voice cut through the stunned silence. She's lying. This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I was trying to warn everyone about earlier. But Nira was ready for his deflection tactics. She had lived through them. Too many times to be caught off guard. Your brother texted his friend Arjun less than an hour ago, she said, looking directly at Dia. Quote, Dia's been so stressed lately, crying all the time. It's almost too easy. End quote. The silence that followed was deafening. Dia's face had gone completely pale, and Vikram's arm tightened protectively around her waist. I have screenshots of everything, Nira continued, her voice gentler now as she addressed the couple directly. Messages planning lies about Vikram's character, celebrating your pain, and discussing future sabotage attempts. Your brother hasn't been protecting you. Dia, he's been poisoning your happiness because he can't stand to see you flourishing. You're sick, Kieran snarled, abandoning all pretense of charm. You broke into my phone, you psychotic. I found your phone in the bathroom where you left it, Nira interrupted calmly. The messages were appearing on the lock screen. Have to break into anything to see your friend, asking why you're trying to destroy your own sister's relationship. The crowd was completely silent now, all attention focused on the drama unfolding before them. Several people had their phones out, courting what would undoubtedly become family legend. Dia stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Show me. Nira handed over the phone without hesitation. As Dia scrolled through the messages, her face crumpled with a mixture of betrayal and heartbreak that was painful to witness. Vikram read over her shoulder, his expression growing darker. With each revelation, oh God, Dia whispered, looking up at her brother with tears streaming down her face. All those fights, all those doubts. The nights I spent crying, thinking Vikram didn't really love me, ... Her voice broke completely. How could you do this to me? Kieran's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. You have. Everything, he exploded. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect guy, and now a perfect wedding that everyone will talk about for years. What about me? What about what I need? The raw selfishness in his voice horrified even his staunchest supporters. Several aunties were shaking their heads in disgust, and his own parents looked as though they didn't recognize their son. I needed you to be my brother, Dia said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. I needed you to love me enough, to want me to be happy. The truth of her words seemed to hit Kieran like a physical blow. For a moment, his face showed something that might have been genuine remorse. but it was quickly replaced by the familiar anger of someone whose manipulations had been exposed. "This is all her fault," he said, pointing at Nira with venom. "Shh. The one who's trying to destroy this family?" "No," Nira said, and her voice carried an authority that surprised even her. "I'm the one who's trying to save it from you." She handed the microphone back to the sound technician and walked calmly toward the garden entrance. The crowd parted before her, their whispers now carrying admiration rather than gossip. At the edge of the courtyard, she turned back one last time. Dia was embracing Vikram, both of them crying but holding each other with the relief of people who had nearly lost something precious. Kiran stood alone, isolated by his own cruelty. Finally seeing the true cost of his manipulations reflected in every face around him, Rohan appeared at Nira's side as she reached the garden gate. "That was incredible," he said softly. "It was necessary," she replied, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. And it was true. As they walked away from the courtyard together, Nira realized that she had finally found what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not revenge, but justice. Not victory over Kiran, but freedom from his influence. Not a dramatic ending, but a genuine new beginning. Behind them, celebration continued with hushed conversations and relieved embraces, while somewhere in the distance she could hear Dia's laughter returning, pure and joyful and completely unafraid. For the first time in years, Nira's future felt entirely her own.